We are starting episode number 145 of CXOTalk. And you know, when you rely on the internet, sometimes these things happen. In any case, I am thrilled to welcome Sanjay Poonen, who is the Executive Vice President and General Manager of End User Computing with VMware. Sanjay, thank you for your patience in this delayed start. Thank you for joining us. How are you?
Michael, it's great. Don't worry at all. Technology has its ups and downs, but the good news is people always connect, and it's a delight to be on your show.
Well, you're very kind. Sanjay, as a way of setting context, give us a brief sense of your professional background.
Yeah, Michael, we've known each other for a couple of years, actually, dating back to my SAP days, and it's always been a pleasure to get a perspective from you on innovation. I started my career right out of college. I came actually to the country as an immigrant on a scholarship to Dartmouth and $50 in my pocket. Finished my undergrad and then worked at Apple as my first job as an engineer. And this was a project that Apple was working with IBM called Taligent. 4 years later, I did my Harvard MBA, came back and was involved with a startup that I was part of the founding team with, named AlphaBlocks, that eventually sold to IBM, and then was an executive at Informatica, running one of their business units, and also ran marketing. Went on to Veritas and Symantec, and probably the most formative part of my years were at SAP, where I spent 7 years, built the analytics business, the big data business, the mobile business, and also ran industry solutions. All in all, I had a great time kind of building what I would call the systems of engagement are at SAP that complemented the systems of record. And here I am at the last 2 years at VMware. Pat Gelsinger, my boss and the CEO, and Joe Tucci, our chairman, succeeded in convincing me that there was a big opportunity in end-user computing, and that's what we're doing here, and it's been a boatload of fun.
Okay, so Sanjay, you've had your background incorporates both the business side and the technology side. Tell us about your group at VMware, End User Computing.
Yeah, you know, I think that, I'm a product guy. I'm a software engineer, computer science person, and although I've been more in business roles the last 3 years, my hardcore kind of DNA is really as an engineer and a product person. So, what I have really sought to do is, at any role, build innovation that's a forcing function better than the alternatives in the market. We at VMware have thrived in being a disruptive innovator in everything we've done in the data center. What we're trying to do in this notion of the digital workspace or mobile workspaces are also being disruptively innovative. So it's just a joy to bring that innovation. And along the way, we've also innovated some through inorganic moves. We've made some bold acquisitions, and the combination of organic and inorganic moves have put us in a very formidable position today in the market.
And so end user computing, what does that encompass?
Yeah, so it's just like the word says, it's the computing needs of end users. So if you think about your computing need as an end user, you have a desktop, you might have a laptop, you might have a tablet, you might have a phone, and you might sit in a car, or you might have computing inside a vending machine. All of these are areas where the way in which applications are delivered to that device needs to be so simple, or as we like to say, so Sesame Street simple, that you can deliver any app to any device. Applications today are, they could be client server, they could be web, they could be mobile. In any of those form factors, the device factor could be a desktop or a laptop running Mac or Windows or Chromebook. It could be an iPad, it could be an Android tablet, it could be a Samsung Android phone, or it could be a vending machine. The ability to deliver any app and any device is something that we are uniquely provisioned to be able to do, and that's my focus here in the end user computing team at VMware.
So any app to any device. So maybe drill down into that for us a little bit.
Yeah, so if you think about yourself in any industry, perhaps you're in healthcare, you may have a Windows application that you want to be able to deliver on an iPad, because it just so happens that app has not yet been completely built for HTML5 or mobile. You might have a web application like a Salesforce that you're trying to deliver into any type of device. That might be somewhat easier, but there still needs to be security, so you can put this on a bring your own device, tablet. And finally, you might have a mobile application. It might be a DocuSign or a Dropbox or Box that you want to deliver onto your phone so you can actually get the benefit of digital signature, but you want the security of it. Being able to take any of those types of applications that I described, client server, web, mobile, and then say, don't worry about the type of device, we can now help you deliver to your end users. What is the benefit of the end users? Their productivity goes up significantly. We call that, allowing these end users to work at the speed of life. They can work and play. They can, go from the office to the park, work at home, and their applications just are seamlessly served up to them, just the same way that music or movies are served up to you and your consumer experience with, Netflix or iTunes or whatever have you in the consumer world.
So obviously, there's a very significant technical infrastructure, but I would imagine that what you're describing relies equally as much on the human factors and the user experience to keep the simplicity.
Absolutely. I think there's two aspects that need to happen. There's a technology stack behind that, and that's what VMware does well. We're an infrastructure company, the fastest growing infrastructure company. We have great assets in the data center, and we now have great assets in the digital workspace. But the user experience absolutely has to be pristine. We, in fact, call that the coming together of consumer simplicity with enterprise security. The user experience needs to be such that if you move from any of these devices, you don't notice a difference. It's just served up to you. You don't have delays. And the reason many of the companies who focused on this type of problem have failed in the past is the solutions have been too costly and too complex. So we come at this with a very new approach to it, a more innovative solution, and one that's actually built for the mobile cloud era. In the mobile cloud environment, you need something that's much more optimized for a tablet and a phone or a machine, as opposed to just the old desktop world. And the cloud environment, you need to have something that's built for cloud-first deployment as opposed to just on-premise.
So you're combining, so when you talk about bringing together consumer with enterprise, you're very much focused on the security aspects from the enterprise point of view.
Yeah, I'll give you an example. We just acquired a beautiful company called Boxer that has an inbox experience that runs on your iPhone or your Samsung phone in a beautiful way. That's not intended to replace naturally the consumer grade native email, but in many cases, customers told us they were frustrated with their desire to have something that was as secure as what they had in the past with BlackBerry, but they didn't like the user experience of products like Good Technology or others, and they wanted a product that had a consumer-grade user experience, but also enterprise security. And that product, you can all download it on the App Store. Download Boxer, and you'll get an example of its beautiful user experience. We use its consumer feedback that we get from lots and tens of millions of users who download this into the enterprise version of our enterprise mobile management solution inside AirWatch, and now Boxer is going to become the face of our future inbox capabilities. That's a good example of consumer simplicity meets enterprise security.
And when you talk about the digital workspace, other people use the term the digital workplace. Talk about that and the connection to what you were just describing.
Yeah, digital is what everyone seems to be saying right now. I like it, quite frankly. It actually represents the movement away from paper to something more kind of, driven by a automated machine like a phone or so on, and that's a good paper moving to digital. It also represents the movement away from manual to automated. So the word digital, we like that. Gartner and a number of analysts are also using that, which is great. Whether it's a workspace or the workplace, it really is very simple. Like that term says, it's the space that you work. We were the first to coin the term workspace in 2007. VMware made an acquisition. I was looking back at historically how far back we had used it, and began to play out the vision that a workspace could be something that was neutral to the type of device you were working in. So it didn't matter whether you were on a Mac or Chromebook or web, a Windows laptop or Windows desktop, or then later on a tablet or phone. The space in which you work could be abstracted away from the physical applications. And that's something that we've now really, really perfected with an innovative stack that's cloud-centric. And we've now coined that term, the digital workspace. So we coined the term the workspace way back in 2007. We've evolved that now to be very mobile-centric, more software-defined, if you would. And we think the nice way of describing that today is a digital workspace. You're going to hear that being something that becomes this gravitating term for the delivery of any app to any device.
Okay, so Sanjay, then what does this mean for how people actually work? So you're describing technical capabilities. Now talk about the impact on how people actually get their work done.
Yeah, you have to take a day in the life of any person. So you take a doctor, and I showed this demo at last year's VMworld. But imagine a doctor that enters a hospital, and the first thing they do maybe is they go to their office and they can bring up an application. It might be medical records, and it's on their Windows, but it's delivered not by physically running that EMR application on their desktop. It's virtualized, it's running behind the scenes on a server. And with our data center software, what's deployed to you is a virtual desktop or a virtual app. You don't know about it, but it's just seamlessly. You log in, single sign-on, and it's there. Then you pick up your iPad and you walk to the ward. And now maybe that same EMR application or some other one where you're kind of zooming in or, if you would, into an X-ray could be delivered to you, but now it's an iPad. You get into the ward and you now have a thin client computing terminal where you actually are getting very, very highly graphical digitized versions of some part of the patient's anatomy or whatever have you, or an MRI scan. That again is delivered to you on a different type of client, a thin client computing. Again, none of the software is actually sitting on that, but it has all of your profile and your credentials. Finally, you leave the office, you get in your car, and you've collaborated around a particular consultation you want with another doctor that might be another hospital, and you've marked up a particular X-ray diagram or an MRI in a nice collaboration tool like Content Locker. You share this with another doctor, they annotate it back and send it back to you. That day in the life of a doctor, what's behind the scenes powering their entire user experience is VMware technologies. Horizon, AirWatch, single sign-on identity. But to the user, it's a very, very seamless way in which they're just working, and we are just the plumbing of the infrastructure, make all of their applications delivered into any device. So we're not an applications provider. Those are companies like Epic, or in the case of financials, it might be SAP, or CRM, it might be Salesforce, or HR, it might be Workday, or document sharing, it might be Dropbox or Box. We are the infrastructure company that allows any of those applications to be delivered to any device. And you can take that same use case to any other industry.
So the point then is to give the user absolutely the full set of capabilities that they would have if they were in a physical office, but essentially mobile wherever they happen to be.
And Michael, that's what we described as working at the speed of life. That means your life continues and you don't have to lug around your desktop wherever you go because that application only ran on Windows, right? Or it's not yet running on an iPad. So, we take a lot of inspiration from the consumer world. In your consumer world, you get in your car and you don't lug around 300 CDs and then try to load them up in your car. That may have been what you did in the 1980s or 90s. Now you have iTunes, you have your iPhone or your iPod, you connect it into your car and music's just streamed in. The same with movies. You might be watching a movie here via Netflix, you get on a plane, you land in London, you can start the movie exactly where you stopped. That same experience of working at the speed of life is what we're trying to bring from the consumer world into the business world.
Sanjay, we have a question from Alan Berkson, who's asking about thin clients. And he says that term is a pre-public cloud term. And so I guess that maybe you can talk a little bit about thin clients versus apps.
Yeah, I'd say, listen, from our perspective, we think that the client ends point of it, without actually getting into the noun thin client that was used before, can get thinner and thinner. In other words, it doesn't require fat desktop, whether it's Windows, whether it's Mac, whether it's Chromebook. Each of these endpoints now are getting thinner and thinner. Now, there is a term thin client computing where the terminal really is a very thin client with very little horsepower, might have great graphical capability or so on and so forth. So whether it's the physical thin client that Dell or HP or anybody else, sort of makes, or it's the adjective as opposed to sort of the thin, the way in which you would describe your client becoming thinner and thinner. From our perspective, we're actually not, focused on that. We can certainly run on thin client computing terminals like, some of these hardware folks make, But if your client computing strategy, your endpoint strategy is to really not have a fat client, but to have a thinner endpoint, we think that that's where the world is going. Because long term, all of the horsepower moves to the cloud, all the applications move to the cloud, and what you want to be able to have is have that being delivered out irrespective of endpoints. If you have to install software or install identities, all of the profile or software on every single endpoint that you want, it just physically is impossible to get done. You lose your mobility because you want to be able to use an enterprise application in the terminal of San Francisco Airport. Or in many cases, whether it's the new mobile endpoints, these applications haven't really been built sometimes for Android or iOS or even for the web. So that's how I would think about the current and the future of thin client computing.
So again, there's this significant infrastructure that companies need to put in place to enable the capabilities that you were describing, but at the same time, to get users to adopt this new way of working requires a digital mindset and cultural changes, even, and work and process changes to take place as well.
Yeah, no, I'd agree. And listen, I'd say while it could be scary, the infrastructure behind the scenes is what we do well. Infrastructure problems are what VMware solved really well. We've been the fastest growing infrastructure software company, since 0 to 6.5 billion in 15 years. And we like those problems because we abstract them away, we virtualize them, if you would, and we make them easier and simpler. Now, the other thing that's make that simple is today, in many cases, you don't have to stand up that infrastructure yourself. We can do that in the cloud, whether it's desktop as a service or running on mobile solutions. Our solutions are all cloud-centric. Now, the other part that you talked about is just as important, which is the process and the people aspect. And I advise a lot of technology leaders and line of business leaders, you have to have a very different mindset to the way in which you think about things in this mobile cloud era. First off, you have to go digital. I mean, you almost have to make sort of a revolution to paper processes and manual processes and look at every single way by which digital technologies, where phone can replace the need to capture paper receipts. You can take a copy of a receipt and then digitize that, and expense reimbursement gets done in a much more mobile-centric way. That's what Concur, companies in that area, do really well. Workflow processes that are very cumbersome, route this to route that, could be a much simpler workflow process on a mobile application that's built. And then the approval, if you were my boss, Michael, could be just routed via email, and that workflow process, whether it's expense or vacation days. And then there's a number of such processes. Medical records, it's a beautiful digitization process that should not be, today it's very point to point. You share a text message, maybe you have phone calls, but the sharing of information, and some of it for good regulatory reasons, HIPAA and others, has to be confined. But there's a lot we can do to bring the world of document sharing of medical records or even images like x-rays, and make it so easy for two doctors to collaborate. In many cases, in doing that, you're actually probably saving a life. So we look at any of these use cases. Another one that I'll give you, a great one that's, in the airline industry now, AirWatch is becoming almost a de facto standard. You think about these pilots that are lugging in, 30-pound bags into the cockpit. I've always wondered what's inside that bag. I assure you it's not their toiletries. It's a lot of paper manuals for the landing instructions of a plane, or the flight instructions about, that the plane or the airports it's going to land in. That can now be digitized. United Airlines and several other airlines were some of the first to do that with an iPad. Other airlines like Delta picked a Microsoft Surface tablet. And whatever your device is, the documents are being digitized, and it reduces weight of what you take into the cockpit. The next thing that happens, the flight attendants have got iPads where they're checking out what the passengers are ordering, and they maintain your profile so they can have a much better customer relationship with you. And then the third thing that happens after, the people on the shop floor who are maintaining the plane have an iPad to actually help with the experience of how they're going to do the maintenance and predictive maintenance and plant maintenance off the aircraft engines. So the entire aircraft industry there goes digitized. The infrastructure providing that behind the scenes is VMware Technologies. So we want to be in a place where you go industry by industry, whether it's healthcare, whether it's education, whether it's financial services, whether it's airlines. We're bringing that digital infrastructure to the working experience of everybody from a flight attendant to a mechanic. That's the way we think about the problem.
Okay, so your customers are putting in this kind of infrastructure, which then has the potential to significantly change the way people work. But how do they? What is then required to drive adoption and to drive the cultural changes that are necessary to convince people to collaborate who maybe before, didn't? They were focused on their own silos.
Yeah, and I think it's a good question. Ultimately, these people and process aspects, it takes a visionary leader who is willing to drive change by saying the world is moving digital or the next generation is moving digital. It's really important that we revolutionize the way in which we think about this process and embrace the technologies of the millennials. And it could be a mobile device. It could be a cloud technology. So at the core of it, we think whether it's this is no respecter of age. I mean, I've got my parents dealing with my grandchildren now on FaceTime or whatever have you. So irrespective of age, there has to be an impetus by a visionary leader who says the digital transformation has got to happen. We're going to embrace cloud and we're going to embrace mobile and throw away aspects of things that are either paper or manual and make that a mandate. And that usually, without that leadership, and then they create centers of excellence to allow the delivery of that technology very quickly, whether it's the rapid transformation of the desktop to something that could be virtual, or the rapid deployment of mobile with management security solutions like AirWatch, or the sharing of documents, or identity management, all the types of things that happen. Those are just technology areas that behind the scenes, a visionary leader is driving that into the organization. And then I think usually you find line of business, the users themselves are delighted to welcome this because in many cases, they're using consumer applications like Facebook or Twitter in their consumer life. They can bring their Mac or their iPhone or their Samsung phone, and they can bring their own device, bring your own phone or bring your own laptop, and they can get the experience of business applications now on their personal devices, improving their productivity. Ultimately, the gain for an end user is significant productivity gain that allows them to work at the speed of life, means they get more done in less time, and then they can do what they want with their surplus time. Some of them may want to go and spend time with their family. Some of them may want to work more. I'm not here to make a judgment call on work-life balance, but I would say in general, if we can increase the productivity of end users, the company or the organization benefits at the end.
So there's a significant leadership component. It's not just the technology, but it's the technology combined or within the context of the leadership.
Listen, it can happen without leadership too, but our studies have shown in the research of what we've done of best practice companies that have rolled out business mobility initiatives, there's often a visionary leader, a CIO, a CTO, maybe even a CEO that's driving change and forcing this often with, of course, a bottoms up also encouragement. So I think it's a combination of a strong leader, but then maybe a group of voice of millennials that are from the bottom up, demanding and requiring change. That combination creates a tornado that ultimately helps an organization. And there are company after company that I could cite that are case studies that are best practice examples of embracing that type of digital revolution.
So you have leaders. So you have the technology infrastructure. You have leadership at the top that is driving the vision of where this is going, but you also have grassroots support for that vision and for the execution of that vision.
You've got the right three things there. And then I'd say if you were going to add a fourth, it would be best process in this. I mean, it's always people, it's product, people, and process, right? The three Ps that typically make anything in innovation really well. On the process front, you find setups like centers of excellence to make it such that the rollout of the technology, or you do things like roll it out with mobile and cloud centric. These are process-oriented ways by which you say, hey, listen, we're not going to do something unless it's this. Or we're going to have this lean, mean center of excellence. For example, one of the things we've done here as we've rolled out mobile is we created an IT cafe right near our real cafe, our restaurant, where when people come and have a lunch, they can go downstairs to the IT cafe, they bring their devices, hey, listen, I need help. All of a sudden, we find the help desk calls are going down, and all of a sudden, our CIO tells me IT is actually starting to become popular because they're viewed as like someone who can help them and people get their device or their phone addressed while they're having lunch. These are practical ways by which you change the process to actually make an end user's productivity significantly better.
So tell us a little bit about the center of excellence concept in this case.
I think, it's been something that I've always been, in BI and analytics, I worked very closely with Gartner as they were rolling out the BI and analytics centers of excellence. And in both SAP and my prior experience at Informatica and AlphaBlocks, we drove that business objects, stood for that inside SAP. And I think it's become now a very common practice for the way in which you roll out best practice of analytics. Because this notion, today, of course, you have scientists, big data scientists, and machine learning kind of centers of excellence. It's not one of those skills that everybody wants to perfect, but to the extent that you can have a brain trust, of course, there are analytically, all of us should have an analytically, savvy mindset, but the way in which to best use the tools or the best way to get this done or to share that best practice, having some center of excellence, some brain trust, if you would. And the same thing I think I would apply to mobility and to other kind of key disciplines, where that center of excellence becomes something that our organization can count on. Listen, all of us want to have experts that we can, who do we typically go to when we have a legal crisis? The best lawyer in town, right? Who do we talk to when we have a medical crisis? The best doctor in town. I think the same way, if there's some center of excellence for the key things you're trying to get done that acts as a business partner to you in any of these areas, I think we see that becomes one of the key success criteria as these projects get rolled out.
So as the company is undertaking this transformation, building the brain trust becomes a way of consolidating, as you said, the best practices and the strongest expertise. And I'm assuming then it serves as a resource for the company and also as a center point to radiate out that expertise and share it with people inside the company.
I agree. And I think that one of the things we find is that brain trust doesn't need to be big. Often people think, oh, you need to hire a huge team. And I think, quite frankly, lean and mean brain trust, you want to call that, or that center of excellence, that's another synonym for it, could become. I usually, in any areas, I'm always looking for the smartest people. I spend 30 to 40% of my time, if it's not meeting customers, it's recruiting. And I'm scouring LinkedIn or wherever sources of places where people either send me names or so on, and I want to meet them for a coffee, because it's really, at the end of the day, a talent war, right? You're trying to recruit people that maybe 3 or 4 or 5 other companies are trying to recruit. And the more that you could have your arms around that best talent, and in each area feel like you've got a brain trust that's the best, or a center of excellence that's the best for a particular, I think you become a much better evolving and high-performance organization over time.
So we've been talking about leadership, Sanjay, and for the many years that I've known you, you have been presenting and talking about a concept of leadership that you call servant leadership. And so maybe you would share what that is and your thinking about that.
As you can tell, I'm very passionate about leadership. In fact, on my Twitter handle, for those of you who follow me at Poonen on Twitter, I talk about loving music, the piano, which is I play the piano, and leadership. Listen, leadership is one of those things which is, vastly misunderstood and in many cases abused. People think, oh, the only way you can be a leader is to be a manager. I think the greatest leaders to me are people like Nelson Mandela, Mahatma Gandhi, people who lived, I'm using examples from the 20th century, who were examples of people who created movements. Leadership to me is being able to get people to do what they don't want to do and loving it. That's, I think, a Peter Drucker line. And if you think about the freedom movement in India or, the fight against apartheid in South Africa, many of these things went on whether Nelson Mandela was in jail or not. So I'm very inspired by leaders inside and outside of technology that can actually create movements. And they can get whole organizations to work and drive a cause, whether they work for them or not. And I think the way in which you get that to happen is this notion of servant leadership, which is, at the end of the day, you look at yourself, and it's a great line that I have from Nelson Mandela that said, listen, lead from the back and make other people feel like they're leading from the front. So it's almost like you're leading from the back of the room, and people are not even looking, but they hear your voice. They know that you're kind of there. You're helping drive them. You're their coach. but they in turn are driving the org. When you get an organization to understand that, that their greatest power is them, and you're really the facilitator of that. Another good example of that is a conductor of an orchestra. I use this example a lot in my leadership classes, which I'll talk about in a second. But the beauty of an orchestra is he or she is not the best violinist or the lead violinist, the lead trombone player, or the one playing the cymbals or timpanis, whatever. They're just the one pulling together. But the moment they stop using their arms, the orchestra stops. If they do the wrong thing, one side of the orchestra, the left side, might playing in disharmony with the right side. So, and I'm a musician. I love music, and a lot of my great examples of how teams work together are baked in music. So we have to cultivate a group of leaders that are not self-serving, that are thinking of the rest of the team above themselves. I use this poem a lot from a great freedom struggle fighter in India named Rabindranath Tagore, who said something like this: I went to bed and dreamt that life was joy. I woke up and realized that life was service. I acted, and behold, service was joy. So I think when you have your life driven by the way in which you serve your teams, clearly all of us are ambitious. We want great things. But I often find, sadly, as people get more and more successful, invariably they get preoccupied with themselves. They're occupied in their own ego. They kiss up and they kick down, so to speak. And those are qualities that ultimately I think, it can work. There are few people in this world who are extremely arrogant and done extremely well. But I think that as you think about, the success of a great leader, clearly being smart's helpful, being hardworking is very helpful. But when you can combine smarts with hard work and humility, I think you get something very special. And I will tell you that that's a rare combination: smart, hardworking, and humility. So part of what I've done over the course of the last 7-10 years is lead this class called Leadership Development, Time for Leadership Now. And I've put, I think, 1,000 or 2,000 people through it. Practically every manager that worked for me at SAP and now at VMware has been through that curriculum. It's not something that I developed myself, but it was very inspired by people like Noel Tichy, who drove the HR curriculum at GE. And that's really helped me inspire people to drive this type of leadership that's a constant learning and teaching. And hopefully the few people viewing this can see how passionate I am about this.
So, I have to say, it's the first time ever on CXOTalk anybody has mentioned Rabindranath Tagore, and thank you for that. I'm not an expert on his work, but his poetry is simply extraordinary. And I tweeted out the Wikimedia page about Tagore, so people can go and read it. So this notion of servant leadership, how can one cultivate that?
I think first off, I talked this about everything in life being about teaching and learning, right? I think first off, all of us desire mentors, right? I encourage every leader to seek mentors. I've been very fortunate to work with some incredible CEOs over the course, and others, but I use these because often I was working for them, whether it was John Thompson or John Schwartz, Shai Agassi, Bill McDermott, Vishal, as you know, Vishal, and now Pat Gelsinger, Joe Tucci, our chairman. These are incredible men who, and in many cases, I've also learned from many women too, who've been folks whom I worked for on boards or other, who have been incredible, inspirations to me in the way in which they lead. And in many cases, they're also very down-to-earth individuals, if you get to know them, that have humility at the core of what they've done, and with stories and I've just been very fortunate to work for them and watch their success. And I'm not perfect. None of them are perfect. They've all got their own, strengths and weaknesses, as do all of us. But, as one learns in that environment where you can learn from some of that, my obligation now is to teach. People often say, well, I'd love a great mentor, but they don't spend enough time mentoring others. I find them to be very selfish. They don't mentor others. So I tell everybody, listen, before you think about what you can get mentored by, some big shot in your company, figure out how you can mentor others. I spend a good part of my life trying to mentor other people who are in the younger generation, folks in their 20s and 30s, the millennials, often people who are in school systems, coming out of school. Like just last week, we had folks who were from a underprivileged part of the Bay Area, and were up and comers, and we're 17-year-olds all thinking about the future of life. And to me, it was most exciting, motivating hour I could spend with 17-year-old, young women and men who were thinking about their future of life, and encourage them to work hard, go to college, okay, be in a learning mode, and then teach others. And we have to do more as leaders to ensure that we are instilling these values into the next generation. So part of what I do when I teach these leadership development classes, I teach the class myself, Michael. I don't outsource this to some HR person. I teach this myself because it's really important that every single manager or leader in my team see that I want them to be successful. And my job there is kind of like almost like a parent figure, helping be the coach to make sure the children on your team, which are your people employees, are doing. And it's not like I'm being pedantically talking about children, but it's almost like a parent. You're an employee-manager relationship. Often it's like a parent-child relationship. You really have to make sure you're looking out for the best for them. One other example I'd share is I often find that employees and managers are threatened by hiring employees better than them. And they feel intimidated by that, or they tell them, listen, I don't want you to go and talk to my boss unless I'm in the room. All of these sort of insecurity complexes that sort of develop around a person that, to me, we've got to destroy in the way in which we drive our corporate culture, because ultimately it's a sign of insecurity. Imagine I've got a 9-year-old girl and I've got twin 5-year-old boys, and I love running the backyard with my 9-year-old. And imagine if I'm today I can probably beat her in a race, but very soon she'll probably beat me. But imagine if I was threatened by that. I mean, in fact, every time she beats me, I'm more excited than ever. But often I find that same relationship does not exist between an employee and their manager. Manager finds that an employee is getting too strong, they want to kind of put them down under their thumb. So these are the types of things that we teach and develop with an obsession on people and talent. And I think it's made a great difference in creating a corporate culture in the companies I've been involved in, whether it's SAP or here at VMware, that brings the best talent and the best energy out of our people to help them reach the highest potential in their careers.
So Sanjay, the notion of being focused on mentoring and teaching others, in general, would you say that that helps be an antidote toward the kind of arrogance that is antithetical to the servant leadership that you've been describing?
I think, certainly when you teach, you have to certainly know what you're talking about, and it allows you to explain and cultivate teamwork. So it's certainly one. But there are other things too. I think you really have to surround yourself. I mean, you are like the company you keep. If you surround yourself with arrogant people, you're probably going to be arrogant. But if you, can make sure that a key part of your life is also surrounding yourself with folks who are humble and can teach you humility, you're probably going to learn from that and, of course, teach that to other people. Now, listen, I want to be very clear. Servant leadership doesn't mean that you're like a doormat that everybody walks all over you. People know that I'm one of the most competitive people. You just have to watch my tweets. I want to win against my competition. The score needs to be 100-0.
Yes, I know that is absolutely true about you.
And I want to negotiate, and I want it to be a strong position. But it really is like, okay, when I was at SAP, I competed pretty hard against Oracle. Here I compete with companies like Citrix and Mobile Iron and Good and others. My point there is like, listen, when we're done, we'll get back on, into having a drink or a coffee, and we're friends. It's not personal at all. So you have to be in a place where just because you are a humble person doesn't mean that you're not competitive, you're not ambitious. All those are important, but you don't do it where you're being a shark. I mean, your ambition should not be one where you're having to eat other people to rise up the corporate ladder. That's that type of ambition, which is selfish ambition. Ultimately, I think can work for some period of time, but is the undoing. When you have a person who rises up because the organization sees in that person, hey, listen, I want to follow that person, not because that person's been a shark. I want to follow that person because there's leadership attributes I just admire about the way they're unselfish, the way in which when they build other people. That's the best type of leader. That's a Nelson Mandela. That's a Mahatma Gandhi. That's a leader that ultimately creates a following wherever they go, right? So I think that ultimately we look at ways like this where we can continue to cultivate in our best people. And this is not just managers, anybody who has a desire to do more, a leadership potential that's always thinking about other people. I mean, there is no I in team, right? So we're constantly looking to see how the team wins. And when the team wins, there's clearly going to be often a Michael Jordan or a Scottie Pippen or, whoever have you, that's going to shine. And that's okay. And we use a lot of sports analogies to map this out. But ultimately, the team benefiting is what we really, really focus and obsess about.
So this kind of leadership, which is flexible and adaptable and strong, let's apply it now to a different context, which is IT. So there's a big context shift here, but IT is undergoing this tremendous change. And so from this servant leadership perspective, what advice would you have to CIOs who are just faced with this significant change in the technology and their role in budgets are shifting, technology budgets are shifting outside IT? What should a great CIO leader do?
I think, honestly, much of what I've described, it's awesome, Michael, that we've been speaking the last 15, 20 minutes really about the soft topics, right? I went to business school at Harvard, and I remember sitting through organizational behavior and some of what was felt like soft topics, and I thought, man, this is boring. Get me to corporate finance and, technology and operations and things of that kind. I will tell you, my experience in life is the hard stuff is the soft stuff, and the soft stuff is the hard stuff. I spend a significant part of my time coaching, grooming, hiring people. It's all the organizational behavior parts of my life that I feel like often I'm a psychology major. So I think a great CIO, first off, has to understand their greatest asset is not just the people, not just the products or the technology they have, but the people and the processes they set up. I think, honestly, in anything in technology, you're focused on three things: product, people, and processes. But the people and processes are the soft stuff that often are the reasons IT projects go wrong. And I find the greatest CIOs I know that I've sort of gotten to know and inspired by, they are just leaders that have a way by which they've hired the best people, they're grooming the best people, they're always looking for process innovations, they're being innovative about it. And of course, they have a discipline to pick the best products in the way in which they roll out technology. But you look at their teams, and when they leave and maybe do something else, they've got a great team underneath them that can step up. They're very good at communicating their goals crisply. They're always doing town halls in ways that, those skills map across any organization, whether it's a CIO, a CFO, or me, a general manager in charge of a business, or, a CEO of a company. Any of those are those same skills. But beyond that, I think an IT leader, in their teaching and learning, are trying to surround themselves either on their team or in a community of people they learn from people who are smarter than them that they're learning from. And I find these CIOs are trying to hang out with other CIOs that are doing best practice. They're trying to emulate them, have them kind of, teach their teams what to do. And then they learn from those best practices. And I find my greatest learning from hanging around with CIOs or CISOs or CTOs, folks who are technology savvy, is to constantly ask them, okay, you're spending this much on IT as a percentage of revenue. How do you compare that to what other CIOs are spending? Is that best practice? Is that not? You're thinking about these projects now moving to the cloud. Okay, got it. Is that best practice or not? You're thinking about this spend on applications versus infrastructure. How does it compare to others? Is that best practice or not? They're constantly learning and challenging each other to, without sort of thinking they've got it all figured out. So there's a lot we can go on, and I'm not the best. My job has never been a CIO, but I'm very fortunate to work with, Bas Ayers, our CIO here at VMware. He's world class. The former CIO prior to that was Tony Scott. He's now Barack Obama's federal CIO. So I've had a chance to work with some world-class CIOs. The CIO at SAP was Oliver Boosman, I think, who's now at UBS. So any of these CIOs that I've had the fortunate privilege of working with, I've learned a ton from them. And then, of course, their network of many, many other CIOs in the industry that I deal with as part of my Rolodex.
Yes, Oliver Boosman, he is at UBS. He was a guest on CXOTalk, and of course, he's amazing. Sanjay, we just have a few minutes left. So what advice do you have to organizations that want to roll out this kind of digital workspace that you were describing earlier?
Hey, step number one, call us. We'll be happy to help. No, I wanted to give the self-serving commercial and get that out of the way. I think you should really look at the way in which mobile and cloud are changing everything, okay? If you're bound to the old world of looking at things, you'll probably be just stuck on a fat desktop of the past. But mobile and cloud are changing everything, okay? That means that you can, in many cases, take paper processes and digitize them, manual processes and automate them, and then figure a way by which you can abstract away all of your applications on one side, all of your devices on the other side, and say, okay, good, how do I bring them together? So make a list of all of the applications you have. We have probably hundreds of apps, maybe 300-400 apps at VMware in IT here. And then all of the types of devices people want, from a Windows laptop. We have a lot of people who now want Macs. Some people want Chromebooks. To the tablets people want, to the phones people want. And then ask yourself, how do you map that application, all of the applications, to any of those devices in a way that allows these users to use them any place, anywhere, anytime, okay? And then, of course, if you need help with the technology, we'd be delighted to help you. We have many customers. We're gaining a lot of market share in this space, so we have a lot of expertise in this area. I've tried to make my dialogue here not vendor-specific, but one that inspires a little bit of what we're trying to get done, both in the technology world, but also more importantly. And then I would say my final piece of advice is, listen, hire smart people. Listen, it's a talent war, talent game. I spend, my time, if I divide it, I'm probably working 200% of a normal 40 hours, 50, 60, 70 hours. But if you take 100% and divide it, I probably spend 40% of my time talking to customers and partners, 40% of my time recruiting, and 20 or 30% probably in meaningless meetings I'd like to get out of. But that time where I'm recruiting or retaining, it could be recruiting or retaining talent to get them motivated, is just time that's incredibly precious.
Okay, we have been talking with Sanjay Poonen on episode number 145 of CXOTalk. Sanjay, thank you so much for joining us. And everybody, we appreciate that you stopped in, and we will see you again, not next week, which is Thanksgiving, but the week after. Thanks so much. Bye-bye.